Hi everyone, this is Traci Fenton, founder of WorldBlu, and today we're going to talk about freedom-centered design, the key to building a world-class culture. What is the optimal organizational design for the success of our teams, our organizations, our schools, our judicial systems, our governments, and our world? As top leaders, we have to ask ourselves this question. If we want to build high-performing, highly successful, highly profitable, and happy teams and organizations. And yet, so often, we're not intentionally thinking about the design of our teams or organizations at all. As a result, we end up unconsciously defaulting into a command and control, fear-based organizational design, which ultimately produces a fear-based culture. This is why when we hear or experience systemic problems across the US and around the world, such as racism or sexism, broken educational systems, corrupt and authoritarian governments, and toxic workplace cultures, what we are really talking about are the systems that have not been designed correctly. And the way to fix these wide-ranging issues is to fix the systems and processes. In other words, design of our organizations and institutions. But what design model should we use instead for our systems and processes? And what model of organizational design can even fix these issues? The problem is, if we as leaders don't understand the 10 proven principles that you need to design freedom-centered and democratic systems and processes that produce the kind of freedom-centered cultures, communities, and countries that people are literally dying for, where everyone can feel heard, treated fairly, respected, and supported, we will continue to design corrupt judicial systems, inept governments, failing schools, and horrible workplace cultures that suck the life out of people. And how long can this really continue? How long can injustice, corruption, inequality, sexism, ageism, racism, rankism, and so many other problems continue to persist? When is enough enough? Well, the time is now to put an end to all of this. I know it sounds like a tall order, but I invite you to stick with me, and I will show you that it is possible to design our organizational systems and processes in a way that works for everyone. And it doesn't have to take forever, require a lot of time or money, or even be cumbersome. It can actually be quite fun. In this presentation, I'm going to teach you the proven system of organizational design that we've researched, studied, and implemented successfully around the world for almost 25 years that creates organizational systems and processes that are just, transparent, and fair, that hold people accountable, treat others with fairness and dignity, and are built on a foundation of integrity, valuing both the needs of the individual and the needs of the collective community, and gives real power to the people. What is it? It's freedom-centered design based on the WorldBlu 10 principles of organizational democracy. And in this presentation, I will teach you how it creates the optimal conditions of success for everyone. For almost 25 years, my team and I have been working with leaders in for-profits, nonprofits, Fortune 500 companies, startups, schools, and even sports teams in 100 countries worldwide, teaching leaders how to design their organizations on the principles of freedom and organizational democracy rather than fear and control. We've worked with top companies such as DaVita, Mindvalley, Widen, Beetroot, GE Aviation Durham, Meetup, Geometric, Groupon, Pandora, and hundreds more, teaching leaders the exact design principles I'm going to teach you today. I've spoken at Harvard, Yale, the US Naval Academy, done a TEDx. I've spoken several times at South by Southwest, the CIA, and many more places to leaders from over 100 countries about freedom-centered design and organizational democracy. And our work has been recognized in Fortune, Forbes, Fast Company, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Inc. magazine, Entrepreneur, the BBC, NPR, and hundreds of other media outlets, and in over 36 books. And every leader we've taught these principles to who has implemented all 10 principles into their systems and processes has built a team or organization that has financially prospered, developed systems and processes that were more resilient and adaptable to crises such as global pandemics or recessions. And on the whole, built an organizational culture that, while not always perfect, was much more freedom-centered and fear-based, and that people loved. So now, let's take a look at the 7 myths of organizational design and the 7 key things that you must do to build the systems and processes that create the optimal conditions for success for everyone. We have explored the first 2 dimensions of the Freedom at Work model in my earlier presentations. And if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to go and watch those presentations. Those first 2 dimensions are freedom-centered mindset and freedom-centered leadership. They comprise the 3 prongs of the Freedom at Work model: mindset, leadership, and design. So now it's time to teach you how to design the organizational design part. Design your team, division, or company with freedom rather than fear and control, so that we can solve many of the systemic issues that plague our teams, organizations, and institutions today. Fear-based organizations are not designed with the principles of freedom and democracy, but rather with fear-based command and control principles of inequality, injustice, opacity, greed, irresponsibility, and more. They are usually hierarchical and bureaucratic, unjust and unfair, have policy manuals that are a foot thick, and their entire focus is on oppressing and controlling the human spirit. You can see it in people's eyes when you look at them on the train, subway, or sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on their way to work. The light in their eyes is gone. Fear-based teams or organizations steal the light in people and slowly, painfully extinguish it. And I believe that's nothing short of immoral and unethical. So what's the solution? Well, let's take a look at the first myth and find out. Myth number 1, the design of freedom-centered systems and processes just happens. Well, the truth is, you must intentionally design freedom-centered systems and processes for your team or organization. Independent research conducted with WorldBlu found that 75% of a team's, organization's, communities, and even country's culture is determined by its systems and processes. Let me say that again because it's a really huge point. 75%, yes, 75% of a team's, organization's, communities, and even country's culture is determined by its systems and processes. It is not determined by who the leader is at the top. Your culture, whether fear-based or freedom-centered, command and control or democratic, is determined by the systems and processes, in other words, the best practices that you use to operate each day. Just replacing a top leader without intentionally and consciously redesigning your systems and processes will not, I repeat, will not solve the systemic problems you may be facing in your team or organization right now. So what is the optimal model of organizational design? Well, let's take a look at the next myth to find out. Myth number 2, top-down command and control organizational design is the best model. Well, the truth is, organizational democracy is the optimal model for designing your systems and processes. The optimal model for organizational design that is the most fair, equitable, transparent, and just, that holds leaders and everyone accountable while balancing the needs of the individual and the collective, and can rapidly adapt to market changes, global pandemics, and economic booms and busts, while bringing out the best in human potential, is organizational democracy. What do I mean by organizational democracy? I will explain in just a moment. But first, a quick history lesson. How did the command and control, top-down pyramid structure of organizational design come to be the dominant model for most businesses and life? Well, before the first industrial age, we were mostly agrarian societies, and we didn't have much need to figure out how to organize and govern large groups of people. But during the first industrial age, which spread throughout Europe and the US from approximately 1760 to 1840, with the birth of factories came the need to organize larger groups of people to get things done. There were two types of organizational models to look for guidance at that time: the military model and the newly formed democratic United States of America model. But the industrial men at the time chose the military model, and the command and control model became the dominant model for structuring most businesses at the time. The first industrial age led to several more industrial ages, followed by the digital revolution and the information age. I believe the information age has now given birth to an entirely new age, an age of power to the people unlike anything we've ever seen before. I believe we are now in a democratic age. In this new democratic age of decentralized power, the dominant command and control top-down hierarchical model of organizational design of our businesses, governments, judicial systems, healthcare systems, educational systems, and even religious institutions is completely inadequate. As a result, we see increasing anger and pushback on these outdated systems and processes. People all over the world are demanding a change, and they should, because there are many reasons why unfair, undemocratic, fear-based systems don't work. They are linear, non-adaptive, inflexible, slow, often unethical, exclusive, and outdated structures that simply can't adjust fast enough to the demands and complexity of today's world. What our organizations need, whether they are businesses or schools, nonprofits or governments, is a system of design that is nonlinear, highly adaptive, agile, ethical, and inclusive. This is what organizational democracy delivers. But what exactly is organizational democracy? Most of us think democracy means voting or politics, but that is not true. Too often, democracy is defined in the political sphere by the capacity to vote in elections, or maybe the existence of a free press, for example. But these actions alone don't prove that a country is democratic. They vote in North Korea. Does that make it democratic? Of course not. And in many countries, there is a free press that is quite sensational and inaccurate. These practices, although often considered indicators of democracy, are not guarantees of democracy. So what is democracy and organizational democracy? After a decade of research, my team and I identified the exact principles needed to design a successful democratic system. We call these the WorldBlu 10 Principles of Organizational Democracy. And all 10 principles must be operationalized in order to design successful democratic systems and processes for any organization. The 10 principles are purpose and vision, transparency, dialogue and listening, accountability, choice, the balance of the individual and the collective, fairness and dignity, integrity, decentralization, and reflection and evaluation. And what makes organizational democracy so superior to any other organizational design models that have come and gone through the years is that it is a complete system that values the organization and the human spirit. Whereas other quasi-democratic systems are often overly engineered and static, leaving out the heart and humanity, focusing too much on the self and not enough on also building community, or missing the vital principles that keep the entire system in balance. The WorldBlu 10 Principles of Organizational Democracy delivers a balanced, humane system that meets our human needs for community, connection, and voice, while also meeting our organizational needs for flexibility, growth, and adaptability. Organizational democracy is timeless, timely, and universally applicable across every size of organization, from small to very large, and in all sectors, industries, and geographies. Myth number 3, organizational democracy means voting on everything, decisions never being made, and things going slowly. Well, the truth is, organizational democracy is a system that goes beyond voting, is highly agile and fast when done correctly, and very adaptable. Organizational democracy is faster in the long term because there is a sense of shared ownership, engagement, collective intelligence, and commitment to success. It is more agile and adaptive because it is principle-based rather than practice-based, which means that an organization's underlying democratic systems and processes can still be grounded in democratic principles even as the practices evolve as the organization grows. I'll give you an example of what I mean in just a moment. And let's remember, voting is just a way of making a decision. It's not always the best way, and voting doesn't necessarily mean you have democracy. 2 other democratic methods of decision-making are consensus and consent-based decisions. And it's up to the Freedom Center leaders and their teams to decide which decision-making method is the best type of decision that needs to be made for that situation. What my team and I have discovered is that when organizational democracy is designed into the organization, it cultivates an environment where people feel valued and have a voice. And this translates into a team spirit that delivers more engagement, better results, and more joy along the way. It's also the kind of environment that attracts and retains top talent more easily. After all, what kind of environment would you rather work in? Freedom or fear? Now let's take a look at the 4th myth. Myth number 4, to design a great team or organization, just copy other organizations' best practices. Well, the truth is, to design the optimal environment for success, use the 10 principles of organizational democracy. Don't just copy others' best practices. All leaders are looking for great practices and ideas. But if you try to copy other organizations' best practices without thinking through how you need to adapt it to fit your organization's unique context, goals, and needs, it will end in failure. So what should you do instead? You have to design your systems, processes, and best practices based on the democratic principles first. Also, I am very intentionally using the word principles rather than values. So what exactly is a principle? A principle is something that is inviolate and unchanging and points to a true north. Principles are what give structure, such as the principles of mathematics or the principles of aerodynamics. Principles are unchanging, universal, and timeless. Many people mistake a principle for a value. Values, however, are what guide behavior. And values can change based on the environment or the circumstances, but principles do not change. Principles are like the compass, values are like the map. A principle is not a practice either. A practice is a specific activity that may work in one context, but not in another. Principles are also scalable, whereas practices are not. The only thing that might change would be the way the principle was operationalized, but not the principle itself. That's what makes the 10 principles of organizational democracy so effective. They are a complete, inviolate system of design for your team or organization. And the principles are universal. Therefore, they are not limited to just one part of the world, one type of organization, one industry, or one culture. The way that a principle may be practiced may look different depending on the cultural context, the size of an organization, or what its purpose and vision are, but the principle remains the same. For example, the democratic principle of transparency might look one way in practice in an organization with 5 people, and entirely different when put into practice in an organization with 100,000 people. But the principle in back of it remains the same. And once you understand the principles, you can then design democratic systems and processes that work for your organization. But remember, you must implement all 10 principles, not just a few, or it won't work, my friends. And once you design democratic systems and processes that do work, you can apply them to various divisions and teams, and even to a spin-off organization. Let me give you an example. This is a case study of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, a WorldBlu certified freedom-centered company. Brian Scudamore, founder and CEO of WorldBlu certified 1-800-GOT-JUNK, a $137 million business, identified 200 systems and processes, aka best practices, that he could take from his current company. So 200 best practices, systems, and processes from his current company and apply to his 2 new businesses. What was the result? Well, within 3 years of launching, his new business called Wow One Day Painting was a $5 million company. His second company, You Move Me, hit that same benchmark in just 6 months. So when you nail the systems and processes, you can then take those and apply them to other organizations, spin-offs, teams that you have once you nail them. So let me give you another example. This is a company called DreamHost, a WorldBlu certified freedom center company based in LA. And we took them with our democratic systems and processes. We took their spin-off from a $0 to $175 million sale in just 2 years. Here's how their co-founder, Dallas Kashuba, explained it. When we started DreamHost in 1997, we knew immediately that the traditional top-down style of management wasn't going to work for us. We wanted to give our team a voice and a say in the direction of the company. We had created a freedom center workplace before we even realized there was a name for it. Those values carried through to our founding of a spin-off company called Ink Tank in 2012. We infused WorldBlu's democratic principles into our shared thoughts on leadership, organizational design, and employee participation from the very beginning, and it paid off in a big way. Just 2 years after its inception, Ink Tank was purchased by Red Hat for $175 million. We saw firsthand that a culture built on trust, freedom, and a shared vision can have incredible value. And so did the 200 people who benefited financially from the sale. All right, myth number 5. Organizational democracy only works in small companies, certain industries, and in certain countries. Well, the truth is, organizational democracy works in all sizes of organizations, in all industries, my friends, and in every country. We've taught organizational democracy to very small organizations with just 2 people, all the way up to a multinational company with over 120,000 employees. We've taught organizational democracy to leaders in almost every industry, from healthcare to technology, retail to education, sports to manufacturing, and more. So why does organizational democracy as the framework for freedom-centered design work everywhere? Because organizational democracy is principle-based rather than practice-based. So you can adjust how you practice the principles to fit your culture, size, industry, and goals. We've seen it work in hundreds of teams and organizations all over the world. The only caveat is that the top leaders of the team or organization must have high self-worth. As I've talked about in my other presentations, they must have this high self-worth or they will feel threatened by giving freedom to their people, and they'll sabotage it. All right, myth number 6. Organizational democracy is a nice ideal, but it doesn't help an organization make more money. Well, the truth is, companies that implement organizational democracy massively outperform against the S&P 500. Freedom-centered organizations achieve 7 times greater revenue growth compared to S&P 500 companies. Let me tell you a little bit more, and you can take a look at this chart. According to an independent analysis, Companies that practice the proven freedom at work model achieved on average 7 times greater revenue growth over a 3-year period compared to the S&P 500 companies. In other words, WorldBlu members achieved a staggering 103% revenue growth rate compared to the S&P 500 companies, which only achieved a 15% revenue growth rate during this same period. And this period of time was actually just at the end of the last Great Recession. So it's incredible to think that WorldBlu companies have, on average, companies that practice freedom at work and this democratic design have on average 700% greater revenue growth compared to the S&P 500. Myth number 7, organizational democracy isn't as resilient or adaptable as traditional organizational models. Well, the truth is, organizational democracy is much more resilient and adaptable, especially in a recession like what we're in right now. Unlike command and control structures, organizational democracy, by definition, is a living system designed to handle and adapt to perpetual change. Because democratic organizations are designed on democratic principles and cultivate leaders at every point throughout the organization, they are more sustainable and less susceptible to failure when there are changes in senior management, their industry, or the economy. 95% of WorldBlu clients practicing freedom at work survived the last Great Recession. And here you can see a chart on this as well. So during the Great Recession in 2008, over 10% of companies failed, meaning they went out of business, whereas WorldBlu companies practicing the freedom at work system had only a 4.6% exit rate, proving to be much more resilient during challenging economic times. In short, 95% of WorldBlu clients practicing the freedom at work model survived the Great Recession. The bottom line is this, my friends. So much of the unrest in our organizations and in our world is caused by undemocratic systems and processes that leave people feeling left out, unvalued, unsupported, voiceless, and dehumanized. Here at WorldBlu, we spent a decade researching the exact principles that are needed to design democratic rather than undemocratic systems and processes that will transform our teams, organizations, schools, communities, and governments. And we've spent almost 25 years successfully implementing the 10 principles of organizational democracy in teams and organizations around the world. So again, let me recap for you the shortcut for solving so many of your organizational issues. It's the 10 principles of organizational democracy, the framework for freedom. Again, those 10 principles are purpose and vision, transparency, dialogue and listening, accountability, choice, the balance of the individual and the collective, fairness and dignity, integrity, decentralization, and reflection and evaluation. We put in the time, money, energy, and resources into figuring this out so that you can know what they are and implement these principles right now with a sense of certainty and real results. We have leaders from over 30 countries listening to this presentation live right now in all different industries. And just imagine the impact it would make on so many people's lives, the effectiveness of your organization and our world if you went back to your team or organization and started to democratize your systems and processes beginning today. And if you don't feel comfortable designing your own democratic systems and processes and want some guidance, or you want to be a part of a world-class community of leaders building democratic teams and organizations around the world, simply become a member of WorldBlu, and we will help you get there faster, more easily, and with a ton of support. We also have hundreds, yes, hundreds of proven best practices from WorldBlu certified freedom-centered organizations that we can help you adapt to your team or organization. Because if we don't start consciously and intentionally designing our teams and organizations with the 10 principles of organizational democracy, and we continue to unconsciously design control and fear-based systems and processes instead, we will continue to be trapped in the same unproductive, fear-based cycles that we've been in for a very long time in this world. Now is the time for change. And I hope all of you listening will take these principles back to your team or organization and start applying them today. It's time to design a more freedom-centered world through the way we design our teams and organizations. And together, I believe that we can.